The two immortals meet. Kali held the dagger to Odin's neck, the same neck that had just recovered from self-inflicted rope burn. She looked him up and down and spat in his face. "Bring me to the leader of the New World Corps, now!" She almost spat again, for he began to laugh, and interrupting her action, he answered her. "I have something of an autonomy from them." He wiped the spit off with his torn sleeves of his arm. She slowly withdrew her dagger. "Autonomy or not, I demand to see them. Where are they?" The dagger still aimed at Odin from Kali's many scarred hands and wrists. A similar fate had been bestowed upon her. God exiled us all. Go on. Kali lowered the dagger finally. He exiled his own son too. Odin the Black teared up a bit and said, "I am not the original Odin. I am Odin the Black. I wasn't sent here, but came with two other members of the council. Anansi stayed behind. The old Odin of White passed on and became a CEO, and who knows what really now became of him." A hurricane was brewing in the east. Odin the Black continued, "I am Daniel. Lucifer took your old job. We made a deal with the lead immortals here that we would be each autonomous as long as no one meddled with each other." The new immortal with one eye glanced down at the ground, wiping the final bits of Kali's spit off his bearded face. "So you can't lead me to them?" Kali questioned him. "Not even if I wanted to. I have no clue where Coyote and his brothers reside, or the Sky Father. We only corresponded by secretive posts to evade the watchful and wrathful eyes of God, for he hath a fury that burned a few of my mortal lives before I attained godhood." Kali was disappointed, and she could not help but stare into Odin's eye, as dark and reflective as ever. She could see things that only she knew in his cornea, visions walking by like mirror shadows. She saw her temporary form as a child's doll, a cruel and unjust punishment from God himself, for she only questioned him once. He sent her soul into that doll owned by a little black girl who lived on a farm. The doll was passed down for centuries in America, the New World. Wars passed by as her immovable ragdoll form collected dust and cobwebs in a wooden box in the attic of Rutledge Manor. Always waiting, never experiencing much but the passage of time, Kali was trapped until a little deaf girl found her. Unbeknownst to Kali or Carissa, the child who saw spirits in the house, Kali was released by a spell gone wrong. A witch 3 blocks over had attempted to release her own bad luck, but the Latin involved was complicated. Kali was reborn in 1973. She was immortal, but born to 2 mortal parents. They resided in Chicago, where they called the fertility clinic daily, begging for a miracle. Their prayers were answered. Kali found herself face to face with the first immortal she had met in the New World, determined to enact vengeance upon God, the immortal formerly known as Gosh. She set out and searched until she gave up. She gave up her search after 3 years, until she saw an abnormally powerful man dressed in all black. He wore an eye patch and got hit by an 18-wheeler at 3 a.m. upon leaving the city hostel. There she began to phone 911 on her cellular until he rose up from the ground. His crushed bones began to heal. Smoke bellowed from his nose and ears. No blood dripped from his mangled body, which began to repair itself in a matter of minutes. Odin popped his neck and looked around. I sure am glad nobody saw that, he thought to himself. That was when Kali came out from the woods across the road. You there, she had hollered. She didn't draw her dagger until he began to run away quickly. She easily caught up to his body, which was still repairing its final touches. He tripped and fell. The interrogation had begun. So you're Daniel? Kali exclaimed. She had watched Daniel closely and traded notes with Satan, formerly known as the fallen angel Lucifer, whose wings were scorched off by the fire which raged from God's nostrils. Yes, I've had many names, even before Daniel, though I now go by Odin the Black because of Satan's soul reassignment. It was time for old Odin of White to retire and recycle his immortality. For all we know, he could be mortal again. No one knows for sure how long one stays a child evolving omniscient. No one knows much about CEOs, just that they're generally stupid, and their answer to everything is primordial soup. Odin the Black told Kali everything he had experienced. She listened carefully as they both took frequent glances around each other's shoulder. As his story progressed, so did their paranoia. God was always watching, listening. If not he himself, his agents were worldwide. Some healed the sick, and some charmed snakes. Some would cast spells of frenzy upon their congregation, as they would spiral out in their mad gibberish, speaking in tongues and ancient sacred language that is said to have cursed Babylon. Babylon. That was where it all began. Of course, there were more beginnings than endings at all times, since one preceded the other and inevitably followed the other. There was no magical karma controlling the soul cycles. Just mortals, and rarely immortals, reincarnating until their cycles ended, and thus began to recycle. Now they had met in a rural town 10 minutes from the coast of Florida. The new world was a lot different than its beginnings. Once it was all green. A squirrel could climb a tree on a Florida beach and travel to Canada without touching the ground. The world had become less green, less led by immortals, less sacred with magic that had to be kept in an esoteric state. God's agents had taken all the practitioners of magic, all the immortals, whether they be sent through that dismal dimensional portal known as the Lake of Fire, or whether they were hung, crushed by stones, or burnt at the stake. God and his agents had a grasp of all the power in the world. The old corporations were practically dead, their leaders cut into smaller and smaller factions, or enslaved as angels. Kali and Odin built a fire about 100 yards into the woods. The curfew ordinance had passed. Several artificial ordnance bots came zooming down the highway outside the tavern where Odin got crushed by a Schneider semi-truck. There they began to brood. Hiding from the police bots had been easier than it should have been. Waves had been sent out from the deep. Odin knew very well about the two-bys. He knew of their beginnings. He had foreseen their future. The bots and their silent war did not bother him. Kali listened until the two fell silent. They fell silent, watching the flickering flames roll about their campsite. It was now time to sleep.